They gave me 4 hours to cross 3-star systems, which told me everything I needed to know about how scared they were. I was sitting in the back of a diplomatic shuttle that smelled like recycled air and old carpet, holding a thermos of coffee that had gone cold somewhere around the second jump gate. My uniform jacket was draped over the seat beside me. My boots were untied. I had not slept in 19 hours, and the only reason I was on this shuttle at all was because a Galactic Accord courier had shown up at my quarters on Outpost Kendrick with a message stamped in 3 languages and sealed with the kind of encryption they only use when civilizations are about to fall. The message was simple: emergency. Quorum, all member species required. Grand Assembly Station, immediately. My name is Ellen Hale. I hold the rank of Admiral in the United Earth Expeditionary Fleet, which sounds impressive until you realize that our entire fleet consists of 140 ships, and most of the galaxy considers us a footnote. Humanity joined the Galactic Accord 40 years ago, in the lifespan of an alliance that has existed for over 11,000 years. We are barely a heartbeat. The other species tolerate us the way you might tolerate a small child at a dinner party. Polite smiles, lowered expectations, a quiet hope that we do not break anything. The pilot, a young officer named Simon Clark, looked back at me through the cockpit partition. His face was tight with worry. Admiral, we are receiving updated situation reports from the assembly station. It is getting worse. Define worse. 3 member species have already voted to surrender. The Pelari withdrew their entire fleet 2 hours ago, and the Mortisai have gone dark. I stared at the thermos in my hands. The coffee inside was useless now, but I held on to it anyway, because sometimes you need something solid to grip when the ground is disappearing beneath you. What about the Vreth? I asked. Simon swallowed hard. 14,000 warships. They crossed into Accord space 6 hours ago. No response to any diplomatic channels. Just the original transmission. The original transmission. I had listened to it 3 times already. A voice like grinding metal, speaking in a language that our translators rendered into flat, emotionless English. Submit or be unmade. No terms. No negotiation. No mercy. The Vreth Dominion had conquered 9 civilizations before turning their attention to the Accord. And in every single case, the result was the same: total subjugation or total destruction. They did not bluff, they did not bargain, they simply arrived, and then everything that existed before them stopped existing. I tied my boots, pulled on my jacket, and walked to the cockpit. Through the forward viewport, the Grand Assembly Station hung in space like a jewel someone had dropped and forgotten about. It was enormous, a structure of interconnected domes and spires built from materials I still could not name after 4 decades of studying alien engineering. Lights moved across its surface in patterns that were supposed to represent harmony among species. Right now, those lights were flickering erratically, which I assumed meant harmony was having a very bad day. We docked at Port 17. The airlock opened and I stepped into chaos. I have been in emergency situations before. I have stood on the bridge of a warship while alarms screamed and hull breaches turned corridors into wind tunnels, but I had never seen anything like the Grand assembly station in that moment. Representatives from dozens of species filled the corridors, and every single one of them was afraid. The pelori, tall and silver-skinned, moved in tight clusters with their heads down, their ceremonial robes dragging on the floor. A group of Sarathi, the avian species, with wings like stained glass, stood in a corner arguing in voices so high-pitched my translator could barely keep up. 2 Cathari diplomats there, massive bodies filling an entire corridor, had simply stopped moving and stood there like statues, their 4 eyes blinking in slow, rhythmic terror. And then I heard the praying. Ambassador Keth Errol of the Relathi stood in the middle of a junction corridor, his insectoid body swaying gently, his mandibles clicking in a pattern I recognized as a funeral chant. He was not praying for himself. He was praying for his entire species, saying goodbye to everything they had ever built, everything they had ever been, in a language that had existed for 9,000 years and might cease to exist within the week. I stopped walking. I stood there and watched him for a moment, and something inside my chest pulled tight, like a wire being wound around a spool. I did not know Keth Errol well. We had spoken at receptions, exchanged polite words about trade agreements and cultural exchanges. But watching him pray like that, watching him accept the end of his civilization with quiet dignity, I felt something I rarely allow myself to feel. I felt angry, not afraid. Not yet. That would come later. Right now, standing in that corridor, with the sound of alien grief echoing off the walls, I was simply and completely furious. Furious at the Vreth for what they intended to do. Furious at the Accord for being so unprepared. And furious at myself for knowing deep down that I had been expecting something like this for years. I walked past Keth Errol, past the weeping diplomats and the frozen warriors, and the species who had already given up, and I made my way to the grand chamber. The doors were massive. They were designed to accommodate species of every size, from the tiny Fenari who stood no taller than my knee, to the Cathari who could look at 2-story building in the eye. As I approached, the doors recognized my diplomatic credentials and slid open with a sound like a deep breath. Inside the grand chamber was a cathedral of light and noise. Tiered platforms rose in concentric rings around a central floor, each platform sized for a different species. Holographic displays floated in the air above the center, showing star charts, fleet positions, and threat assessments that painted the situation in shades of red. The Vreth Armada was represented by a massive cluster of crimson moving steadily inward like a blood stain, spreading across clean fabric. I found the human platform. It was small, tucked between the Sarathi perch and the Mordesian closure, positioned near the back of the chamber, where the least important species sat. I climbed the steps and took my seat, setting my cold thermos on the console in front of me. From here I could see the entire chamber, and what I saw was a room full of people who had already lost. Council Speaker Sethel stood at the center of the floor. He was a crystalline, one of the oldest species in the Accord. His body was made of living mineral, faceted and translucent, refracting light in ways that made him look like walking chandelier. His voice carried through the chamber, without amplification, resonant and deep, vibrating through the floor itself. Members of the Accord, he said, I will not waste your time with ceremony. You know why you are here. The Vreth Dominion has entered our space with a fleet of 14,000 warships. Their demands are unconditional. Surrender. Their history suggests they mean exactly what they say. The chamber murmured, a low, rolling sound made up of clicks, hisses, growls, and whispers from 36 different vocal systems. Sethel continued, our combined fleet, strength of every member species, commits their full military capacity, stands at approximately 6,200 vessels. However, as of this hour, the Pelori, the Vanthic, and the Drenai have formally withdrawn their forces. The Cathari have recalled their border. Fleet effective allied strength is now estimated at 3,800 ships. 3,800 against 14,000. Even I could do that math. And I was not a mathematician. Sethel let the number hang in the air. Then he said the words everyone was dreading. I am convening a final quorum under Article 79 of the Accord Charter. All member species must be present for a collective vote on the question of surrender. This vote is binding. This vote is final. That was why they had called me. Not because they wanted my opinion. Not because they valued humanity's 140 little ships. They needed me in the room so that paperwork was complete, so that when the history books recorded the fall of the Galactic Accord, they could say every species was represented. Even the infant, even the footnote. I sat in my small chair on my small platform and watched the galaxy prepare to die. The debate, if you could call it that, lasted for 3 hours. Species after species rose to speak, and every speech was a variation of the same theme. We cannot win. We must accept reality. Resistance will only increase the suffering. The Sarathi Admiral, a magnificent creature with feathers of deep blue and gold, presented combat projections that showed total fleet destruction within 48 hours of engagement. The Mordecai general, whose scales had turned a pale white I had never seen before, spoke of his people's history and how they had survived for 12,000 years by knowing when to bow. The Fenari representative simply cried, small tears rolling down a face no larger than my fist. And through all of it I sat quietly, I watched, I listened, and I counted. I counted the Vreth ships on the display. I counted the distances between fleet formations. I counted the supply lines stretching behind the armada like threads of a spider's web. I counted the hours since their last reported refueling stop. I counted everything, because counting is what I do when the world is falling apart. Numbers do not panic, numbers do not pray, numbers just are. 3 hours in, Sadal turned to my platform. His crystalline face could not form expressions the way a human face could. But there was something in the way the light shifted through his body that looked remarkably like pity. Admiral Hale, he said, representative of the United Earth Coalition, the quorum recognizes you. Do you wish to speak? Every eye, lens, sensor, and antenna in the chamber turned toward me. They expected fear. Of course they did. I was the representative of the youngest, smallest, most insignificant species in the room. We had been in space for less than 2 centuries. We had no ancient wisdom, no vast armadas, no 11,000-year legacy of civilization. We were children, and children, when faced with the end of everything, are supposed to be afraid. I picked up my thermos, took a sip of the cold coffee, set it back down. Then I stood up, and I did something none of them expected. I did not address the council. I looked past Cecil, past the holographic displays, past every terrified face in the grand chamber, and I said, "Communications officer, open a direct channel to the Vreth flagship." The silence that followed was extraordinary. It was not the silence of shock or confusion. It was the silence of 34 species, simultaneously holding their breath. Nobody moved, nobody spoke. Even the Relathi funeral chant that had been humming softly from the far platform went quiet. The communications officer, a young Sarathi perched behind a console on the central floor, looked at Cecil with wide golden eyes. His feathered hands hovered over the controls. This was not procedure. This was not protocol. No one opens a channel to the enemy during a final quorum. The quorum was about surrender, not communication. Cecil stared at me, his crystalline body pulsed with light, shifting through shades of blue and violet that I had learned to associate with confusion. "Admiral Hale," he said carefully, "the quorum has not authorized external communication." "I am not asking the quorum," I said. "I am asking your communications officer to do his job. Open the channel." Another silence. Then Cecil, either because he was curious or because he simply did not know what else to do, nodded. The officer's hands moved. Holographic display above the central floor flickered, and then a new image appeared. Massive, dark, a face built from angles and armored bone with eyes like furnace coals set deep in a skull that evolution had designed for one purpose. Draka Vaughn, Supreme Commander of the Vreth Dominion, the being who had conquered 9 civilizations and was about to make it 10. He looked at me the way a mountain might look at a pebble. "Who speaks?" His voice was exactly as it sounded in the transmission, deep and grinding. But there was something else there now. A note of interest, or maybe amusement. The Vreth had been transmitting demands for 6 hours, and no one in the Accord had responded directly. Now here was a tiny creature on a tiny platform in a room full of terrified diplomats voluntarily opening channel. "My name is Ellen Hale," I said. "I am the Admiral of the United Earth Expeditionary Fleet." Vaughn's eyes narrowed slightly. I could tell he was scanning his memory, trying to place the name, the species, the relevance. He found nothing of significance. "I do not know your species," he said. "Most people do not," I replied. "We are new here." Behind me, I could feel the collective tension of the entire Grand Chamber pressing against my back like a physical force. To my left, the Sarathi Admiral was gripping his perch so tightly his talons had carved grooves in the stone. To my right, the Mordecai General was watching me with an expression I had never seen on a Mordecai face. It took me a moment to realize what it was. Curiosity. "Supreme Commander," I said, "I have a request." Vaughn tilted his head. The movement was predatory, reptilian, like a hawk spotting movement in tall grass. "You are in no position to make requests." "Perhaps not, but I am making one anyway." I paused. I let the moment stretch. Timing is Everything, in diplomacy and comedy. War, the pause is the most powerful tool you have. It forces everyone to lean in. It forces everyone to wait for what comes next. Could you wait? I said. We are not quite ready for you yet. I have played that moment back in my mind 1,000 times since, and I still cannot fully explain the effect it had. It was as if I had spoken in a language that the Wraith did not have a translation for. Not the words themselves, those were simple enough, but the concept behind them. The idea that prey would look at a predator and say, "Not yet, hold on. Give me a minute." Vaughn did not respond immediately. His furnace eyes stayed locked on mine, and for 3 full seconds, neither of us moved. 3 seconds does not sound like a long time, but when you are staring into the face of a being who has ended civilization, 3 seconds is an eternity. The chamber behind me had gone completely still. Not the tense stillness of held breath, but something deeper, something almost sacred, as if every being in the room understood, on some instinctive level, that they were witnessing a moment that would be remembered. Vaughn spoke first. "Explain yourself." "It is straightforward," I said. "You have come a long way. Your fleet has been traveling for weeks. Your crews must be tired. Your supply ships are probably still catching up to your main formation. There is no rush." I could see his officers on the bridge behind him, visible as shadows in the red light of the Wraith flagship. They were exchanging glances, confused glances. This was not in their playbook. In 500 years of Wraith conquest, no one had ever responded to their ultimatum with what amounted to a polite suggestion to take a break. "We do not need rest," Vaughn said. But there was something different in his voice now, a hairline fracture in the confidence, not doubt, not yet, but something adjacent to it, something that looked like the moment before doubt, the way the sky looks before it rains. "Everyone needs rest," I said. "Even conquerors. Check your ammunition. Counts, let your engineers run. Diagnostics, we will be here, we are not going anywhere. And when you are ready, we will give you the fight you came for." I paused again, then I added, "I promise you, Supreme Commander, we will be worth the wait." The channel held for another moment. Vaughn studied me the way a surgeon might study an unusual growth. Something unexpected, something that did not fit the pattern. Then the channel closed. The holographic image disappeared, replaced by the star chart and the red dots of the Wraith Armada, still holding position. Still holding position. The grand chamber detonated. Not with weapons, with voices. Every species in the room began shouting, clicking, shrieking, or resonating at once. The Sarathi were screaming that I had provoked the enemy. The Pelori representative was demanding my arrest. 2 Cathari diplomats were slamming their massive fists against their platform in what I assumed was either rage or a cultural expression of extreme disapproval. Even the Fenari, who weighed less than a house cat, were squeaking with furious indignation. Sethel's voice cut through the noise like a blade through silk. "Silence." The chamber obeyed, because when a being made of living crystal tells you to be quiet, the vibration alone is enough to rattle your teeth. He turned to me. "Admiral Hale, what have you done?" "I have bought us time," I said. "You have insulted the most dangerous military force this galaxy has ever seen." "No. I have confused them. There is a difference. Sethel's light shifted to a deep amber. I had learned that amber meant he was thinking, processing, trying to see the shape of something that was not yet visible. You believe the Vreth will wait. I believe Drakkar Vaughn has never been asked to wait before, I said. I believe that, in 500 years of conquest, every species he has encountered has done one of two things. They have either surrendered immediately or attacked immediately. No one has ever looked him in the eye and said not yet, and right now he is sitting on his bridge wondering why. That question, that single question, will buy us time. How much time? I picked up my thermos. Enough. I did not wait for the quorum to continue. I stepped down from my platform and walked toward the exit. Behind me, the chamber buzzed with confusion and anger. But I was already somewhere else in my mind. I was running calculations, reviewing contingencies, mentally activating plans that had been sitting dormant for years. In the corridor outside the grand chamber, I pulled out my communicator and contacted my ship, the UES Resolute, a cruiser that looked like a clenched fist compared to the elegant vessels of the other species, was docked at the far end of the station. Simon, I said when my captain answered. Admiral, what happened in there? We are picking up a lot of chatter. I need a secure channel to Earth. Command. Priority black. And I need it in the next 2 minutes. A pause. Priority black. Admiral, that requires authorization from the Defense Council. I know. Tell them Admiral Hale is invoking Protocol 17. Another pause, longer this time. Protocol 17. Is that? Are you sure? Simon, 2 minutes. The line went quiet. I stood in the corridor of the Grand Assembly Station, surrounded by the lingering echoes of alien despair, and I waited for my own people to answer the call. 90 seconds later, my communicator chimed. The voice on the other end belonged to Director Catherine Webb, the head of United Earth Strategic Operations. She sounded like someone who had been sleeping 3 minutes ago and was now very much awake. Ellen, I am seeing the situation. Reports. How bad is it? The Accord is going to surrender. Every major species is either withdrawing or folding. We have maybe 72 hours before the final quorum vote goes through. And Protocol 17. I took a breath. Protocol 17 was a contingency plan that we had developed in the first decade of humanity's membership in the Accord. It was designed for exactly this scenario. Not the Vreth specifically, but the general concept, a threat so large that the Accord could not or would not fight it. A scenario where humanity would have to act alone or nearly alone to prevent the kind of catastrophe that does not just end civilizations but erases them. Activate everything, I said. Quiet. Thunder. The whisper. Webb, all of it. Silence on the line. Then Catherine said, Ellen, if we activate quiet thunder and it becomes public, the Accord will see it as a betrayal. We built a secret fleet inside their territory. They will never trust us again. Catherine, if we do not activate quiet thunder, there will be no Accord left to distrust us. How soon can the fleet be in position? I heard her tapping on something. Running numbers, checking coordinates. 31 hours minimum. Then I need 31 hours. How exactly do you plan to get 31 hours? when there is a fleet of 14,000 warships sitting on the Accord's doorstep. I looked through a viewport at the stars somewhere out there beyond the light of familiar suns, the Vreth are. Man, I was waiting. Waiting because I had asked them to. Waiting because for the first time in 500 years, someone had said something they did not understand. I already started, I said. I asked them to wait. I ended the call and stood there for a moment alone in the corridor. My hands were steady, my heartbeat was normal. My thoughts were clear and organized, moving through possibilities, like a machine sorting data. I was not afraid, not yet. Fear was a luxury I could not afford for at least another 31 hours. I headed for the secure communication room on the human section of the station. I had calls to make, not to the council, not to the species that had already given up. I needed to talk to the ones who had not surrendered yet, the ones who were still standing, even if they were standing on shaking legs. Because here is the thing about being the youngest species in the room. Everyone assumes that youth means ignorance. They see our short history, our small fleet, our limited experience with galactic politics, and they conclude that we have nothing to offer. They are wrong. Youth does not mean ignorance. Youth means we still remember what it feels like to fight for survival with nothing but our bare hands and our refusal to stop breathing. Humanity did not survive ice ages, plagues, and centuries of war against ourselves by being wise. We survived by being stubborn, by being resourceful, by looking at impossible odds and saying, "Fine, but I am not done yet." The Vreth thought they were about to conquer a galaxy. Draken thought he had already won. He had not met us yet, not really. Not in the way that mattered. I reached the comm room, sat down at the console and began to work. The first call I made was to someone the Accord had already written off. General Moreth of the Mordecai sat in near darkness on the other end of the channel. His scales, usually a deep emerald green, had faded to the pale white that his species adopts when they believe they are going to die. His 4 eyes blinked slowly, each pair out of sync with the other, a sign of exhaustion. Behind him, the bridge of his command ship was quiet, too quiet for a vessel that was supposed to be carrying one of the largest fleets in the Accord. "Admiral Hale," he said. His voice was flat, resigned. "I heard about your display in the Grand Chamber. The Council thinks you have lost your mind." "The Council thinks a lot of things," I said. "Most of them are wrong. General, I need to ask you something. And I need you to be honest with me. I am too tired for dishonesty. Your fleet, the Council says the Mordecai have gone dark, that your ships have withdrawn. But I do not think that is entirely true." Moreth's eyes narrowed. "All 4 of them." "What do you mean?" "I mean that the Mordecai are many things, but cowards is not one of them. Your people have a warrior tradition that is older than most civilizations. You did not simply run, you repositioned. And if I had to guess, I would say your fleet is sitting in Karath Nebula right now, hidden in the electromagnetic interference, waiting to see which way the wind blows." The silence that followed was long enough for me to finish my cold coffee. Moreth leaned forward, the white in his scales shifted slightly, a faint green undertone emerging like grass beneath snow. How do you know about the Carith Nebula? Because I pay attention, General. It is something humans are rather good at. What I did not tell him was how I knew. I did not mention the Whisper Web, the network of stealth drones that humanity had seeded across Accord space over the past 4 decades. Tiny devices, no larger than a human hand disguised as space debris and asteroids and dead satellites. Thousands of them drifting silently through the void, watching everything, reporting everything, sending data back to Earth through encrypted channels that no one in the Accord knew existed. We had been watching. For 40 years we had been watching. Not because we did not trust our allies, but because we understood something that 11,000 years of peace had made the Accord forget. Trust is not a substitute for information. Hope is not a strategy. And the universe does not care how old your civilization is when something bigger and hungrier comes along. I have a proposition for you, General, I said. One that does not involve surrender. I am listening. Stay hidden, stay ready. In 31 hours, I will contact you with coordinates and a battle plan. If you like what you hear, bring your fleet. If you do not, you can stay in the nebula and no one will ever know we spoke. Morith studied me, his scales shifted. Again, more green seeping through the white like color, returning to a world that had gone gray. Why should I trust you, Admiral? Your species has 140 ships. What can you possibly do against 14,000? I smiled, I could not help it. General, if I told you that, you would not believe me. So instead, I am going to ask you to do something that is very difficult for a warrior. What? I am going to ask you to have faith. He stared at me for a long time. Then slowly, the corners of his wide mouth turned upward, and what I had learned was the Mordecai equivalent of a smile. Faith, he said. I have not used that word in a very long time. Neither have I said, but I find that desperate times make old words useful again. I ended the call and immediately opened another, this time to Ambassador Kedar Rule of the Relathi, the insecto diplomat I had seen praying in the corridor. When his image appeared, I could see that his mandibles were still clicking softly, the funeral chant continuing even as he answered the calm. Ambassador, I said, I need you to stop praying for the dead and start planning for the living. His compound eyes, hundreds of tiny lenses working in unison, focused on me with an intensity that was almost physical. Admiral Hale, my species has existed for 9,000 years. In that time, we have faced extinction 4 times. Each time we survived because we adapted, but this is different. The Vreth do not allow adaptation. They do not leave survivors to adapt. I know, I said, which is why I did something 3 years ago that I never told you about. He went still, completely, unnaturally still, the way insects do when they sense danger. 3 years ago, I continued, I authorized a covert operation to duplicate and relocate your primary egg vaults, the ones on Relath Prime, the deep ocean vaults that contain the genetic legacy of your entire species. We made copies. We moved them to a secure location outside Accord space. Your people's future is safe. Ambassador, no matter what happens here, the Relathi will survive. The silence that followed was different. From Moreth's silence, it was not the silence of suspicion or calculation. It was the silence of a being who has been drowning and suddenly feels solid ground beneath his feet. You did this, Kethrull said without permission, without telling us. Yes. Why? Because it was the right thing to do. And because I could not sleep at night, knowing that your species' entire genetic future was sitting in one location with no backup plan. Humans have a saying, Ambassador. Do not put all your eggs in one basket. I realize the phrasing is unfortunately literal in your case. For the first time since I had met Kethrull, his mandibles stopped clicking. The funeral chant ended, and in the quiet that followed, I heard something I had never heard from a Relathi before. He laughed. It was a strange sound, like wind chimes. Made of bone, but it was unmistakably a laugh. And when it faded, his voice was different, harder, sharper. The voice of a species that had survived extinction 4 times and was suddenly considering making it 5. What do you need from us, Admiral? Your swarm fighters. Every single one you can launch. In 31 hours. You will have them. I ended the call and leaned back in my chair. 2 down. 1 more. I opened a channel to Fleet Admiral Sarath of the Sarathi, the avian species, whose combat projections had painted such a hopeless picture in the grand chamber. When Sarath appeared on screen, his blue and gold feathers were ruffled, which meant he was either angry or anxious, or both. Admiral Hale, he said immediately. My projections are accurate. I will not falsify data to support whatever desperate scheme you are planning. I do not want you to falsify anything, I said. I want you to run your projections again. With different numbers. What different numbers? I transmitted a data package. Fleet compositions, ship specifications, deployment coordinates, information that until this moment had been classified at the highest level of Earth's military intelligence. Sarif opened the file. His feathers went flat against his body, which I had learned was the Sarathi equivalent of a human's jaw dropping. This as he stopped, looked at the data. Again. Where did these ships come from? We built them. You built 600 warships without anyone in the Accord knowing. We built 600 warships without anyone in the Accord looking. There is a difference. Sarif's golden eyes moved rapidly, scanning the data, cross-referencing it with his own models. His talents tapped against his console in a rhythm that grew faster and faster as the numbers began to tell a new story. If these specifications are accurate, he said slowly, and if the deployment timeline is achievable, then he trailed off. His feathers lifted slightly. Not quite the full display of confidence, but no longer flat with shock. Then what, Admiral? I asked. Then the projections change. Not enough to guarantee victory, but enough to make it a fight. A real fight, not the massacre I presented to the Council. I do not need a guarantee, I said. I need a chance. Run the numbers, all of them. Include the Mordecai fleet, 300 heavy cruisers hidden in the Karath Nebula. Include the Relathi swarm fighters, approximately 800 light assault craft. Include your own electronic warfare capabilities, which I know are significantly more advanced than what you showed the Council. Sarath's feathers rose a fraction higher. You know about our classified electronic Warfare systems. Admiral Sareth, I know about everything. Humans are very good at paying attention. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I will run the projections, but Admiral, even with these numbers, we are still outnumbered. Significantly. I know. Which is why I am not planning to fight. 14,000 ships. Then what are you planning? I am planning to make 14,000 ships fight themselves. I will send you the operational details within 12 hours. In the meantime, I need your electronic warfare ships ready to deploy. Can you do that? I can do that. I ended the call and sat in the silence of the comm room. Through the viewport I could see the faint red glow of the Vreth armadas. Distant engines. They were still holding position, still waiting. I pulled up a tactical display on the console and began to study the Vreth fleet's formation. Not the ships themselves. Not the weapons or the armor or the shields. I was looking at the spaces between the ships, the gaps, the seams, and behind. The armada stretching back across 3 star systems like a lifeline made of steel and fuel, the supply chain. 14,000 warships burn through fuel at an extraordinary rate. Every engine, every weapon system, every life support module requires power, and power requires fuel. The Vreth supply chain was there. Lifeline. A network of tankers and depot stations that kept the armada fed and moving. And because no species in the Accord had ever attacked a supply line, because it was considered dishonorable, because the very concept of hitting an enemy's logistics instead of their warships was seen as beneath the dignity of civilized warfare, the supply chain was barely defended. I stared at those supply lines on the tactical display, and I thought about what honor means when you are outnumbered 7-1. I thought about what dignity means when someone is threatening to erase your species from the universe. I thought about every war humanity had ever fought, every desperate battle, every moment when survival depended not on being stronger than your enemy, but on being smarter, on being willing to do the thing your enemy never expected because they considered it beneath them. Honor is a beautiful thing. I believe in it, I truly do, but honor is a luxury for people who are not standing at the edge of extinction. I opened my communicator one more time and called Commander Daniel Price, my head of covert operations, who was aboard a ship that officially did not exist in a location that was officially empty space. Daniel, I said, Operation Hourglass. Phase 1. You have 22 hours. Understood, Admiral. The stealth teams are ready. Fuel contamination compound is loaded and prepped. No mistakes, Daniel. If the Vreth detect your ships before the compound is deployed, everything falls apart. Admiral, my people have been training for this for 6 years. We can do this in our sleep. Please do not do it in your sleep. Do it wide awake and very carefully. He almost laughed. Almost. Yes, Admiral, wide awake very carefully. Price out. I closed the channel and checked the clock on the wall. 28 hours remained. The Vreth were waiting. The council was panicking. And somewhere in the dark spaces between the stars, pieces were moving on a board that no one in this galaxy had ever seen before, because no one had ever played the game the way humans play it. I stood up and stretched. My back ached. My eyes were dry. The coffee was long gone, and I had not eaten in what felt like a geological epoch. But I was not tired, I was not afraid, I was doing what humans have always done. When the situation is impossible and the odds are absurd and everyone around us is giving up, I was getting to work. The next 14 hours were the longest of my life. I did not sleep, I barely ate. I moved between the comm room, the tactical center I had set up in a borrowed conference room, and the Resolute's bridge, coordinating the most complex military operation humanity had ever attempted, all while maintaining the appearance of a calm, confident admiral who definitely had everything under control. I did not have everything under control. I had about 60% of things under control, and the other 40% were held together by optimism and strong language. The key to the entire plan was timing. Every element had to happen in sequence, and if any single element failed, the whole structure would collapse like a house built from playing cards. Phase 1 of Operation Hourglass was already underway. Daniel Price and his stealth teams, 12 ships so small and so quiet that they barely registered on most sensor arrays, were threading their way through the Vreth supply chain. Their mission was not to destroy the supply ships. Destruction would be noticed immediately. Instead, they were injecting a chemical compound into the fuel reserves of every tanker and depot they could reach. The compound was inert when first introduced. It would sit harmlessly in the fuel tanks for approximately 18 hours, mixing slowly with the standard VREF propulsion fuel, and then when the contaminated fuel was burned in a ship's engine, the compound would trigger a cascade of micro-failures. Not explosions, not catastrophic meltdowns, just a slow, steady degradation of engine performance that would eventually leave a ship drifting. The beauty of the compound was that it was almost undetectable. VREF fuel diagnostics were designed to check for foreign contaminants, but this compound was engineered to mimic the chemical signature of a natural fuel byproduct. By the time the VREF engineers realized what was happening, hundreds of their ships would already be running on poisoned fuel. I had a young officer named Lucy Harmon running real-time tracking of the stealth teams through the Whisper web. Every 30 minutes, she updated me on their progress. Ship 1 has reached Tanker Cluster 7. Ship 4 has completed injection at Depot 9. Ship 11 has encountered a patrol and is holding position. Every update was a small heartbeat of hope or dread. Sometimes it is hard to tell the difference. While the stealth teams worked, I finalized the battle plan with my new coalition. General Mareth's Mordecai fleet would emerge from the Kareth Nebula and hit the Vreth right flank. They would arrive late, deliberately entering the battle after the main engagement had begun, when the Vreth were already committed and could not easily redeploy. The Mordecai heavy cruisers were the largest non-Vreth warships in the galaxy, built like flying fortresses. Slow but devastating. Ketha Rule's Relathi swarm fighters would attack the gaps in the Vreth formation. Relathi ships were tiny, barely larger than a human shuttle, but they fought in coordinated swarms of hundreds, moving with the kind of hive mind precision that made them almost impossible to target individually. They would pour through the cracks in the Vreth line like water through a broken dam, creating chaos and drawing fire away. From the larger ships, Admiral Sareth's Sarathi electronic warfare ships would deploy at maximum range and begin disrupting Vreth communications and sensor networks. The Sarathi had spent centuries developing electronic warfare technology that was frankly terrifying. They could make a ship's sensors see phantom fleets, false asteroids, even holographic copies of friendly vessels. In the confusion of battle, a Vreth captain who could not trust his own instruments was a Vreth captain who could not fight effectively. And then there was humanity's contribution, 2 parts. The first part was the bait. My 140 original ships, the ones the Accord knew about, the tiny fleet that everyone had dismissed as irrelevant. I would send them directly at the Vreth Armada, openly, visibly, a charge so apparently suicidal that Drakkar Vaughn would have to respond. He would see a small, desperate fleet throwing itself against his wall of warships, and he would do what any predator does when prey runs toward it instead of away. He would open his jaws wide, and when his formation spread to envelop my ships, the second part would arrive. 600 warships from Project Quiet Thunder, appearing from the void behind the Vreth formation, hitting the center of the Armada at the exact moment when Vaughn's fleet was stretched thin, and his engines were beginning to fail. It was not a perfect plan. It was not even a good plan by conventional military standards. It relied on too many variables, too many things going right at exactly the right moment. Any proper military academy would have given it a failing grade and told me to try again. But humans do not fight by academy standards. We fight with whatever we have, however we can, for as long as we must, and sometimes the plan that no one expects is the plan that works. 20 hours remained, then 15, then 10. I was standing on the bridge of the Resolute when Lucy Harmon looked up from her console with an expression that made my stomach drop. "Admiral, the Vreth are moving." I crossed to her station. The tactical display showed the red cluster of the Vreth Armada shifting, the dots beginning to drift inward, tightening formation. Not an attack formation, not yet, but a preparation for one. How long? I asked. At current acceleration, they will reach optimal engagement range in approximately 6 hours. 6 hours? I needed 10. The stealth teams were still working. The Mordecai fleet was still repositioning. The contaminated fuel had not yet had time to fully circulate through the Vreth supply network. I stood at the display and watched the red dots move. And for the first time in this entire ordeal, I felt the fear I had been holding at bay. It hit me like cold water, sudden and sharp, filling my chest and crawling up my throat. 6 hours was not enough. We were not ready. The plan was going to fall apart before it even began. For about 10 seconds, I let the fear have me. I let it wash through my body, let it tighten my muscles and quicken my breath and do all the things that fear does when you stop fighting it. 10 seconds. That was all I could spare. Then I put it away. Not gone, never gone, but filed, stored, acknowledged and set aside like a letter you will read later when you have time. Open a channel to the Vreth flagship, I said. Simon, who was on the bridge, looked at me sharply. Again. Again. The channel opened. Drake and Vaughn appeared, and this time there was no amusement in his furnace eyes. He looked like what he was, a predator who had finished being patient. Human Admiral, he said, your time is running out. I know, I said. That is why I am calling. I wanted to thank you. He paused. That fracture in his confidence that I had seen before widened. Just slightly. Thank me for waiting. It was generous, and I want you to know that when this is over, I will remember that you gave us that courtesy. It matters. Von leaned forward. When this is over, your species will not exist to remember anything. Maybe, I said, but I have been wrong before. And so have you. The difference is that when I am wrong, I learn something. When you are wrong, Supreme Commander, it tends to be for the last time. I held his gaze steady, calm, not defiant, not aggressive, just present. A woman standing on the deck of a small ship looking into the eyes of the most dangerous being in the galaxy and refusing to look away. We are ready now, I said. Come when you are ready. I closed the channel. Then I turned to Simon. Signal the fleet, all ships to battle. Stations, launch formation Delta, and Simon. Yes, Admiral. Put Beethoven 7th on the fleet-wide channel. Second movement. He stared at me. Music now. If we are going to do something impossible, we should at least have a good soundtrack. The first notes of Beethoven's Allegretto filled the bridge. As 140 human ships began to move forward, behind us, still hidden in the dark, 2,000 Allied vessels waited for my signal. Ahead of us, 14,000 Vreth warships completed their attack formation. And somewhere in the fuel lines of 1-3 of those warships, a chemical compound that did not officially exist was quietly, patiently doing its job. I gripped the armrest of my command chair and watched the Vreth armada grow larger on the forward display. My heart was pounding, my palms were wet. I was more afraid than I had ever been in my life. But I was also ready. And those two things, fear and readiness, are not opposites. Fear is the engine. Readiness is the steering. Together they will take you places that courage alone never could. All ships, I said into the fleet comm. This is Admiral Hale. You know what we are about to do. You know the odds. I am not going to stand here and tell you that everything will be fine, because I respect you too much to lie to you. What I will tell you is this. Every species in this galaxy looked at this moment and saw the end. They saw an enemy too large to fight, battle too hopeless to attempt, a future too dark to face, and they gave up. I paused. On the display, the Vreth ships were accelerating, coming for us. We did not give up. We are here, and in a few minutes the Vreth Dominion is going to learn something that this galaxy has not yet had the opportunity to teach them. I took a breath. They are going to learn what happens when you pick a fight with humans. The Vreth hit us like a hammer. Their forward elements, fast interceptors, with angular hulls and weapons that glowed like hot iron, swept toward our formation in a wave that filled the tactical display with red. For any other species, this would have been the end. 140 ships against the leading edge of 14,000. Mathematics does not negotiate. But we were not there to win that fight. We were there to be annoying. All ships execute pattern Firefly. I ordered. Pattern Firefly was something our tactical teams had developed, specifically for this scenario. It was not a battle formation. It was a nuisance formation. Our ship scattered, broke into groups of 5 and began hitting Wraith vessels with short, sharp attacks. A volley of fire, a sudden change of direction, a burst of electronic jamming that scrambled sensors for just long enough to be infuriating. We were not trying to destroy ships, we were trying to make the Wraith chase us. And they did. Drakkar Vaughn, watching from his flagship, saw a tiny fleet that should have been running instead darting between his warships like insects around a torch. His tactical officers would have told him to ignore us, to simply hold formation and let the interceptors clean up. But Vaughn was a conqueror. He had spent 500 years crushing resistance, and something about the way we moved, the sheer audacity of 140 ships dancing through a fleet of thousands, offended him on a level that went deeper than strategy. He spread his formation, sent more ships to encircle us, opened the jaws of his fleet wider and wider, trying to swallow the irritating little creatures that would not hold still. That was the moment I had been waiting for. Signal hourglass, I said quietly. Elements phase 3, now. The first sign that something had changed was the light on the far edge of the tactical display beyond the sprawling formation of the Wraith Armada. New signatures appeared, not red, blue, hundreds of them, materializing out of the void like stars being born. General Mareth's Mordecai fleet hit the Vreth right flank with the subtlety of a landslide. 300 heavy cruisers, each one the size of a small city, plowed into the spread-out Vreth formation and began tearing through it with weapons designed to crack open moons. The impact was enormous. Vreth ships that had been chasing my little fleet suddenly found themselves caught between hammer and anvil. At the same time, from the opposite direction, Ketha Rule's Relathi swarm fighters poured through the gaps in the Vreth line. 800 small ships moving as one, flowing through the spaces between larger vessels like a river finding its way through cracks in a wall. They targeted sensor arrays, communication nodes, engine clusters, the small but critical systems that a warship cannot function without. Single Relathi fighter was insignificant. 800 of them, moving with hive mind coordination, were a plague. And from above, Admiral Sereth's electronic warfare ships activated their systems. The Vreth battle space turned into a hall of mirrors. Phantom fleets appeared on their sensors. Ghost ships attacked from impossible angles. Communication channels filled with static, false orders, and duplicated signals that made it impossible to tell real commands from fabricated ones. Vreth captains who had been confidently pursuing my ships suddenly found themselves unsure which contacts were real and which were electronic ghosts. Then the quiet Thunder fleet arrived. 600 human warships dropped out of their concealed positions behind the Vreth formation and hit the center of the Armada like a spear through paper. These were not the small, scrappy ships of my original fleet. These were purpose-built warships, designed over 4 decades with every technological advantage humanity had been able to beg, borrow, or invent. Their weapons were a generation ahead of anything the Accord had fielded. Their shields were layered in configurations the Vreth had never encountered, and their crews had been training for this fight, this specific fight, for years. The Vreth Armada spread thin by Vaughn's. Pursuit of my bait ships was suddenly fighting on 4 fronts simultaneously. Mordecai from the right, Relathi from the gaps, Sarathi ghosts in their sensors, humans from behind, and then the fuel failure started. It began slowly. A Vreth cruiser at the edge of the formation reported engine fluctuations, then another, then a dozen, then 100. The contaminated fuel, which had been silently circulating through the supply chain for the past 20 hours, reached the engines and began its work. Not explosions, not dramatic failures, just a quiet, steady loss of full speed. Found themselves slowing, drifting, unable to maintain formation or pursue targets. It was as if the Armada was bleeding from 1,000 tiny wounds, each one insignificant on its own, but together draining the life from Vaughn's fleet. I watched it happen from the bridge of the Resolute, and I felt something I had not expected. Not triumph, not satisfaction. I felt tired, deeply, profoundly tired. The kind of tiredness that comes not from lack of sleep, but from carrying a weight that is finally, slowly being set down. Admiral, Lucy said from her console. Vreth fleet cohesion is degrading. Multiple ships reporting engine failures, their formation is collapsing. Inward. Casualties, I asked. Heavy on both sides. We have lost 12 ships. The Mordecai have lost 8. The Relathi have lost approximately 40 swarm fighters. Vreth losses are estimated at 600 and climbing. 12 ships, 12 crews. People who had followed me into this because I told them I had a plan. People who were now gone because my plan required bait, and bait sometimes get swallowed. I pushed that thought aside. There would be time for grief later. There always is. Grief is patient. It waits. Continue pressing, I said. All elements maintain pressure. Do not let them regroup. The battle raged for another 2 hours. It was not the clean, decisive engagement that makes for good stories. It was messy, chaotic, and frightening. Ships were damaged and disabled. Corridors filled with emergency lighting, hull breaches were sealed with emergency patches and prayers. The Resolute herself took a hit that knocked out our secondary weapons array and left a scar across our port side that would never fully buff out. But the Vreth were losing, not quickly, not dramatically, but steadily and inevitably. Their engines were failing. Their formation was broken. Their supply line was gone. And for every ship they destroyed, the coalition destroyed 3 of theirs. Then the comm channel opened. And Drakkar, Vaughn's face appeared on my screen for the last time. He looked different. The furnace glow of his eyes was dimmer, not with defeat, but with something I had not expected to see in a Vreth. Recognition. He was looking at me the way you look at something you have underestimated so badly that the mistake itself becomes a kind of revelation. You asked me to wait, he said. I did. I waited. You did. Why did I listen? I considered the question. I could have given him a tactical answer, something about psychological manipulation and the exploitation of cognitive bias. But that would have been incomplete. The truth was simpler and stranger. Because no one has ever asked you to. Before, I said. Every species you have conquered did one of 2 things. They surrendered or they attacked. No one ever looked at you and said, hold on, give me a moment, and when I said you did not know what to do. With that, it confused you. And confusion, Supreme Commander buys. Time was all I needed. He stared at me. The battle continued around us, his ships failing and drifting, my coalition pressing the advantage. But in that moment, it was just the two of us, and the strange, impossible thing that had happened between us. Your species, he said. You are not what I expected. We never are. He was silent for a long moment. Then Drakkar Von did something that no Vreth commander had done in 500 years of conquest. He gave the order to withdraw, not surrender. The Vreth do not surrender, but retreat. A careful, measured pulling back of surviving ships, disengaging from the battle, turning away from accord space. It was not an admission of defeat. It was something more nuanced than that. It was an acknowledgement that the equation had changed, that the easy conquest he had anticipated was no longer possible, that the cost of continuing was higher than the cost of leaving. I watched the red dots on the tactical display begin to move away, slowly at first, then faster. The Vreth armada, diminished but not destroyed, retreated into the dark. Between the stars, the bridge of the Resolute was silent. Simon stood at his station, his hands shaking. Lucy was crying quietly at her console, tears of relief and exhaustion running down her face. On the fleet-wide channel, Beethoven's Seventh had long since ended, replaced by the static of damaged comm systems and the distant sound of ships venting atmosphere and running repairs. I sat in my command chair and watched the enemy leave. Then I opened a channel to the Grand Assembly Station, to the Council, to the 34 species who had gathered to surrender, who had expected me to be afraid, who had called me to witness the end of everything. Sithel answered. His crystalline body was pulsing with so many colors I could not identify them all. Admiral Hale, he said, what has happened? The Vreth are withdrawing, I said. Accord space is secure for now. Silence, then a sound I had never heard before. The sound of 36 alien species, simultaneously processing the realization that they were going to survive. It came through the channel as a wave of noise, voices, and clicks and harmonics that I could not begin to describe, but I understood them, every single one. Sithel spoke again. How long have you been planning this? I answered honestly, since the day we joined your accord. Why? Because we looked at this galaxy and saw something worth protecting. A place full of extraordinary civilizations, extraordinary people, extraordinary potential. And we also saw that all of it was vulnerable. 11,000 years of peace had made you forget what it feels like to fight. So we started getting ready. Just in case. Ready for the Vreth. Ready for whatever came. The Vreth were just the first test. Sithel was quiet for a moment. Then he asked, and if we had surrendered, if the quorum had voted before you could act, then we would have fought alone, I said. 140 ships against 14,000. It would not have been pretty. But we would have fought. You would have died. Probably. But we would have died trying. That is what humans do, Speaker Sethel. We do not always win, but we always try. And sometimes that is enough. I closed the channel and leaned back in my chair. The stars outside the viewport were the Same stars that had been there an hour ago, a day ago, a millennium ago. They had not changed. They never do. It is only the creatures living among them that change, that grow, that learn, that sometimes, against all odds, survive. The shuttle ride home was quiet. I sat alone in the passenger compartment, my thermos empty, my uniform wrinkled, my body running on nothing but residual adrenaline and the stubbornness that comes standard with every human being. My hands were shaking, not during the battle, not during the negotiations, not during any of the moments when I needed them to be steady. Now in the quiet afterward, with no one watching and nothing left to do, my hands finally admitted what the rest of me had been refusing to acknowledge for the past 31 hours. I was terrified. I had been terrified the entire time, from the moment I stepped onto the Grand Assembly Station and saw the funeral prayers and the white scales and the combat projections showing total annihilation. I had been afraid on a level so deep it felt like part of my skeleton. But I did not let it stop me. I could not let it stop me, because there is a difference between being afraid and being stopped by fear. And humans have been navigating that difference since we were hiding from predators in tall grass 100,000 years ago. I looked out the viewport at the galaxy, spinning slowly past, somewhere out there the Vreth were licking their wounds and reconsidering their assumptions about the universe. Somewhere else the Mortisai were restoring the green to their scales. The Relathi were singing something that was not a funeral chant. The Sarathi were running new projections that for the first time in a very long time did not end in extinction. And here in this small shuttle, a tired woman with shaking hands and cold coffee stains on her uniform was thinking about what comes next, because something always comes next. The Vreth would return, or something else would come, something bigger or stranger or more dangerous. The galaxy is vast and it does not run out of challenges. But that is a problem for tomorrow. And tomorrow I will get up, tie my boots, pour my coffee, and get to work. Because that is what humans do, not because we are brave, not because we are wise, not because we are stronger or smarter or better than the beings we share this galaxy with. Because we are stubborn, because we care, because when everyone else in the room looks at the impossible and sees the end, we look at it and see a problem. And problems, however large, however terrifying, however hopeless they may seem, are meant to be solved. The council expected fear. They got something else instead. They got us.